Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. It's day 3 of CISO Forum Canada, and it's my honor and pleasure to host this panel discussion led by and sponsored by VMWare Carbon Black. They are the platinum sponsor of CISO Forum Canada. On behalf of the advisory group, I'd like to thank them for their support. If you joined yesterday's keynote, again hosted by VMware Carbon Black, Eric O'Neill, author of Grey Day, made a very important statement. Read between the lines, said something to the effect of, our problems are not stop signs. They're guidelines. They're an opportunity for us to pivot. The topic for today, security is broken, or security as we know of it is broken, is quite a bold statement to make. When you speak to C-suite executives who lead large enterprise or even small to medium enterprises in their cybersecurity practices, they followed a lot of models that we've learned through experience, but also learned through academic training or industry training. Make a statement that in many cases that model is broken really requires some background and really requires to be substantiated. For the last few days, you've been hearing about tools in cybersecurity, but you've also been learning about process, about technology, about people. My guests today are proponents of the idea of people, process, technology, as one of them says, in that order. And what we're going to do today is we're going to try and understand, what do we mean when we say it's broken, but more importantly, how can we in a methodological process fix what we understand to be broken? My name is Abbas Hirji. I work at Durham College, where I lead both the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. I want to thank the town of Ajax for this lovely facility that I'm beaming in from, as well as the team from CyberX for their beautiful production work and for the streaming quality. My guests today, no strangers to the security market, and are no strangers to the world of understanding what needs to be fixed in cybersecurity. And without further ado, I'm going to go to each one of them and have them say a little statement about what excites them about the world of cybersecurity. Mark, I'm going to start off with you. Tell us your title, brief introduction, and what excites you today about cybersecurity. Mark?
Thank you, Ali. So I'm Mark Dillon. I'm the VP of IT for Waterloo North Hydro. We are a power distribution company. We're in the business of delivering hot showers and cold beer. And that's what we essentially do, is take the transformed power and bring it to your home so that you can work remotely and so forth. We're seeing a lot of change happening in that everything is gradually becoming remotely accessible. Things that may still have mechanical controls may be actuated over some kind of digital means. And how we thought of security in the past doesn't work for that. And what I'm excited about is the details of the tactics and a way that we can simplify it all so that, me and my team aren't the only ones that understand it, making the understanding accessible.
Thank you, Mark. And I want to work with that just a little to remind our audience to pay very close attention to the diverse industries that are being represented. Pay attention to the fact that Mark didn't say that he's a CISO. He's the Vice President of IT, and how security falls under his portfolio will certainly make for an interesting discussion. I'll go next to Brenda. Brenda, thank you for all your support on the advisory group. I want to ask you to introduce yourself, your title, and also tell us one thing about security that's keeping you up at night. Brenda?
Sure. Thanks, Sally. So my name's Brenda McCulloch. I'm the Senior Director of IT and CISO at Teranet. I've been here now 2 years and actually been in security since the inception of my career. Been in IT security now for 20 years. So what keeps me up at night? To be quite honest, I don't think about this on a nightly basis. I actually sleep well, but generally speaking, the dependency of security and being everybody's responsibility, that is critical and key. So it doesn't keep me up at night, but I do concern myself with it because I want to make sure everyone's educated about it, especially how quickly security constantly evolves. And it excites me because you're never stagnant within security. and digital world, because we're constantly evolving, and you constantly have to learn. So I like to be pushed, and I like to also push others so that we all can benefit.
There was ever an ambassador for the statement, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Brenda, thank you for that introduction. And more importantly, also thank you for highlighting the importance of data. Because for those of you who are going to look up Brenda, she's on cyberexchange.ca. The firm that she works for has a lot to do with data. And how threat actors might be interested in that will again be a very important subject of our conversation. And now, I'd like to introduce our other two panelists who come from VMware Carbon Black. For those of you who haven't had the chance, they have a fantastic group and lounge on cyberexchange.ca. Take a look at some of the information that's there. One of the things that you will notice is that there's something in it for everyone. Whether you're into the technicalities of security, or whether you're into the audit and governance side of it, a couple of playbooks there that their team has posted up. I want to thank them for being proactive and having those kind of resources available to the community. From VMware Carbon Black, we're going to start off first with David. David, a quick introduction, your title, and what excites you about the work that you do at your workplace. David?
Thanks. Appreciate for everybody to be here. Dave Balcar. I'm a security strategist here at VMware Carbon Black. I've been in security like Brenda over 20 years myself. My background's actually around pen testing, IR, and forensics. I'm usually the guy known as breaking all the things. My big field here, I do a lot of security research, whether it's IoT or devices or reverse engineering more on the hardware side myself. And I mean, that definitely, especially from Mark's point too, all these devices out there that are controlling everything. So if anything, it keeps me up at night is just the assault on not only the healthcare industry, but whether it's sewage plants, water plants, electricity, the grids, all of this stuff, that really gets me and keeps me excited to see. I love catching the bad guys, so to speak.
And this aspect of catching the bad guys, that's something that we're actually going to start off with when we talk about the shifting perimeter of cybersecurity. I've had some conversations at the Power Hour with Mark Dillon where we talked about the idea of the traditional perimeter having shifted, hoping today to point out a couple of new areas where the perimeter exists. So thank you for that introduction, Dave. Lastly, we have Al from VMware Carbon Black. In a similar vein, introduce yourself. What is the work that you do? And again, what keeps you excited about products that you have on the market? Al?
Well, first off, thanks for the opportunity. Very excited to be here. Looking forward to this great conversation I expect we're all going to have. My name's Al Timchuk. I'm responsible for the security business within VMware for Canada. So everything as it relates to security, in particular for endpoint, workload, cloud applications, devices. So there's a lot of areas that we touch. A little bit on my background. I've been in MIIT for the last, hate to date myself, but 20 plus years. A lot of experience in infrastructure, also analytics, back to data. Spent a 5-year tenure with our friends over at SAS Analytics, Dell Technologies, and then most recently VMware, and asked really to run this area and build it within the organization. Why I'm here, and I'll put my hand up. I wanted this job really, really bad. And when I look at the industry and I look at opportunity, it always doesn't come along where we can have a imperial impact on our customer environments. Security, as we know, is top of mind. It's in every boardroom. Everyone's talking about security, and what was maybe an agenda that was going to happen 2 years ago, it now needs to happen within days or weeks at minimum. So what keeps me up at night is getting to as many customers as possible. And number one, really listening. If we understand what's going on and the challenges you face, so I'm excited to hear from Mark and Brendan. I talk to a lot of customers across the country in all different business verticals. Really listen and then apply our knowledge, our expertise, our learnings to accelerate change. And obviously help with security posture. So looking forward to this. A lot of great things to talk about. And once again, thanks for the opportunity.
Fantastic. If I can add to that, the entire team at VMware Carbon Black has been a pleasure to engage with, whether it's Krista, whether it's Shannon, who works, Dana as well. The excitement and the optimism that you bring to the table, I think, is infectious. I'm hoping that can get translated into. Okay. I'm going to take the conversation back to two of our advisors, both Brenda and Mark. And Brenda, if we can start off with you. When I think about how security is broken, when I think about the perimeter shifting, I often think about a house where, in order to protect it, you typically would lock the front door or set of doors. Imagine you cannot lock that door anymore. Things have changed. There are numerous and multiple points of entry, numerous areas where we are vulnerable. From your perspective, what's changed over the last few years, how you understand protecting the core crown jewels within your organization? Brenda, let's start with you.
Sure. So traditionally, we've looked at data as housing in a central location on a corporate network. And we hone in a lot of resources and investment in protecting the perimeter of where that data sits and where our employees are located. Now, a lot of companies, obviously COVID has accelerated that, but now everybody is working remote. And in terms of data wants to go where it can go. So if you have it where it's traversing into multiple locations, including employees, where they're working remotely and even in different countries, then you really have to think about, is your data really just housed on your internal network? No, because it's traversing in other parts. Obviously, it's encrypted, but you got to think about now the perimeter. Is that really truly that perimeter, or is there multiple perimeters now? And you got to think of the protection of the data itself rather than a location. So if we are thinking about where our skills are, we have to know where that data will go and where our resources are located.
Absolutely. And this point about data, as you even made it clear in your introduction, really relates back to a lot of the things that we've heard through the 2 days and even today at CISO Forum Canada. The opening keynote on day one made such a powerful statement that said, there's no AI without IA, information architecture. And knowing that architecture in and out, not just about the data scientist in your team or the CTO knowing it, it's about the CISO and other folks knowing. So there's quite a lot that you have to grasp technologically and also new areas that you have to familiarize yourself. I want to use that a little bit and come back to our friends from VMware Carbon Black, talk about how they assist. But before I do that, Mark, I want to come to you. You and I have had a lot of discussions and from our power hours to other panels that we've been on. And one of the things that we've said constantly is, listen, buddy, at the end of every day, the clock resets. Every day presents new. One of the things that you've spoken about quite clearly in various discussions is the aspect of security typically has been about how do we protect ourselves on the inside from the outside. But you've been talking a great deal about understanding what's going on the inside, especially when it comes to essential services such as yours, which you said is all about making sure we have hot showers, but much more than that. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening on the inside you think reshapes our traditional security model? Mark?
So the first thing I'd say is I'm not sure security was ever working well to begin with. There's a lot of assumptions we make when we go through it. So you have the idea of I've got a building, I'm going to lock the front doors. But the assumption that once someone's in that building, they're good. Someone's on my LAN or someone's in my network, whatever you want to call it, they just have implicit trust. And I think that was a mistake to make. But it didn't hurt us that much because what we've done is imagine a private business or a library, and you go there as a customer and you need to get access to some records about you potentially. And there's a clerk there and they're the gatekeeper and they hand you the information if you can prove that who you are, et cetera. And it's all a gated process like that. A business like my business would have been the same. But what we've done is we've extended the data so that now people can do it from their house. Now they can do it on the internet. Now there are business-to-business partners that specialize in doing analytics on customer data for us, which means we've opened up accessibility to our information. To do that, we had to automate it. To do that, we had to take it off of paper and put it into a digital system, into a database. And that made it a more tantalizing target. So not only was our security model probably not good to begin with, we've now escalated the jewels. What should you go after? So it's much more tempting. At one point you may not have been able to turn off a subdivision with a computer, but we're getting to where you can now. And that makes it far more attractive than it was. So there's these abstractions that we have about what is a thing to protect, what is data, what is a computer, and that's changing too. And we're not on purpose, but many industries are accidentally putting non-technical people in charge of technical assets because 20 years ago, that thing didn't have an IP address and now it does. And you're potentially putting someone in charge of it who doesn't know what an IP address is or doesn't have a fundamental understanding of it. And your technology people don't even know that that's happening. This creep is something I'm very concerned about. And it makes you want to think about your security in a non-binary way and start to think that trust is it's a spectrum, right? And you need to find a way to measure that. And I think that's what I'm thinking about now. And I don't have answers really, but I've got some thoughts.
On that note, if I don't have answers, I'm going to build from those and say that I have more questions, and I'm going to turn it to our friends at VMware Carbon Black by talking in two poles. One, I want to understand the process at VMware Carbon Black, and then I want to look at the tools that are being used to tackle some of the problems that both Brenda and Mark have for us. Al, let's start off with you. There are an abundance of different vendors and partners to work with, but the VMware approach seems to be quite tailored. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. How do you go about engaging with your clients? How do you start off that process of getting them to adjust to the quote-unquote new normal? Al, let's start off with you, and then we'll go to David.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think before I can comment, I need to add some additional context. So we talk about change, we talk about tools, and one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of as our organization, they call us one of the best kept IT secrets in the industry. There's a great article from an analyst by the name of Andrew Moorhead that talks about that specifically. I encourage everyone to have a look at that. More particularly, when you look at our security business and practice, we actually touch over 20,000 customers worldwide. And there's a reason why I'm sharing that data with you, and we're $1 billion plus business. So we're not insignificant in that approach to helping customers solve business challenges. Now with that, when Carbon Black was acquired by VMware last February, a lot of greatness came along with that. There was R&D, there was an opportunity to engage in existing customer footprints. And what we realized, and why VMware actually purchased Carbon Black, because this notion is security is fundamentally broken. That's a big statement, but I'll simplify it. There's too many tools, there's too many agents, too many alerts, consoles, and too much to manage. So there's this whole area of complexity that's now been accelerated based on this new world we're all dealing with. So if you look at what's happened because of the pandemic and so on, and actually, there's an interesting quote by Winston Churchill, and he says, "Never waste a good, never waste a good situation, chaos." And the reality is, that's what's happened to the industry. So our whole approach, and when we look at this, is we need to help level set and understand really what's going on. And I'm stealing this little story, but I love it because I think it provides more context. And this is from our COO, and he talks about, you go to the doctor for a health check and you say, "Doctor, I want to feel better. There's a lot of things going on today. So how can I stay healthy and feel better?" And the doctor says, "Well, take these, 1,000 tablets or multiple thousand tablets every day." You're like, "That's impossible. I can't do that. Like, I just can't consume that." And that's what we're trying to do as an industry. We're saying, buy more tools, fix this, add a Band-Aid here, and it's going to solve the solution. The problem is it doesn't. So what you have to do is you say, how do I become more intrinsic? How do I actually start changing my behaviors of looking at the problem situation? And what we found is in the security business, there's three elements that really have become paramount in organizations' ability to change. Number one, a lot of the solutions of today is something that we call bolted on. Let's just have a problem, let's bolt on a tool to try and fix that particular problem. And that continues to grow and grow and grow. And then the second thing is there's so many silos. Brenda talked about data is very important, but it lives everywhere. Trust me. And you have organizations, even Mark within your group, I'm sure, that are not necessarily coordinated, connected, collaborated. And that causes another significant challenge. And then the other thing is a lot of the problems we solve today, they've already occurred. So we're reacting to solving situations that are in the rear view mirror. And then these new threats are coming in the front, and we're not even ready because we're too busy trying to deal with what's already happened. So why I highlight that is we really need a new approach. And that's what you will hear from VMware, and you'll hear about intrinsic security platform. And what does that mean? So here's the exciting thing is there is an answer and there is a path forward. And what we need to understand is, number one, there's all these different control points that are out there that create vulnerabilities, be it the network, be it the endpoint, so the device, also workloads, be it the cloud in particular, and then how we even take analytics to have a better outcome and decide here's where we need to prioritize and focus on. So I'm trying to paint a picture of it's not about applying a tool, it's about truly understanding where your question started. What do? We sit down and listen and we observe, and then we'll actually share and bring best practices to the table. And then we'll actually leverage this intrinsic security platform that touches all those control points to drive quantifiable value and outcomes in a very rapid manner. So I have to emphasize it all starts with listening and then obviously sharing. So the tools, you know what, there's a lot of great tools out there, but oh my gosh, there's way too many, even consoles and so on. So obviously you can tell I get excited about this because that's the opportunity at hand. And that's where we want to sit down and say, you know what, let's roll up our sleeves and let's not help you 2 years from now. Let's help you today because this problem's not going away. Anyway.
Thank you for painting that picture, one that we need to frame and constantly reflect on when we think about all of the noise that's happening around us and how do we find the solution that is best tailored to the situation that we find ourselves in. I want to pick on something that you mentioned in sort of midway through your comments where you talked about controls. And David, this is a good little aperture to bring you into the conversation. That is, we can control what we know, but we really can't control what we don't know. When VMware Carbon Black is engaged in let's say with in a situation, the firm is trying to reassess some of its assessment tools, some of its gateways, so on and so forth. How does VMware Carbon Black begin that engagement? How do you help them know what they know, but also get to what they do not know? What are the tools? What's the process? How do you begin? David?
Right. Well, I think the biggest thing is, just like Al said, is that intrinsic security. Because if you don't have that all-encompassing scope, the magic, the holy grail, right? The single console, single pane of glass for everything, it's still not there. But from a VMware vision, we're trying to get there. So that's why the Carbon Black, single console, single agent across multiple OSs, and be able to manage all that. And that's really what's getting embedded into all of the VMware tools to where we can get security at all those control points, whether it is a workload or it is a BDR, VM, or on-prem cloud. It doesn't matter where it is because everything's got an issue somewhere. My biggest thing, though, is above that is visibility. If you don't have visibility into it, guess what? If you can't see it, how do you know it's even happened? Your data is already gone at that point. That's a big thing. I'm a real big fan of the who, what, when, where, and that goes back to visibility again. I need to know who's touching it, when they're touching it, how they're touching it. And, like if we do an IR, if someone gets breached, you always want to know where's patient zero? How did they get in? Well, I've gone into many, many companies and they didn't have the tools to say, oh, this is how they got in, or be able to do a replay, back up a little bit and say, okay, now we know our vulnerability. Or what about the vulnerabilities that no one knows about yet? Like my specialty, I specialize in APTs or nation state attacks. So like the most sophisticated attacks you need out there. But I can tell you from personal experience, when I do pen test, I very, very rarely, I've used 0-day attacks in maybe 4 pen tests in the last 20 years because I didn't need to, because I just use, I can, what we call living off the land, use what they've got. And I just take advantage of it and tear it apart. And a lot of it goes back to, and I tell all these customers, you got to get visibility. You would have caught me on day one if you had visibility across the board.
I really like that aspect, and I think one of the things for our audience, what you're hearing, and not to get philosophical about it, but if you think practically, one of the aspects that our panelists are telling us is broken about security, that often we're listening, or let's stick with the word listening, we're listening to reply. We're not quite listening to understand. And David kind of highlighted that spasmodic reaction that we have. There's been a breach. How do I reply to this? What do I do right away? But we're not thinking long term. We need to start thinking quite a lot about how we understand the situations that we face ourselves in. And that's when this aspect of visibility, dashboards, and metrics has really reshaped the way we think about security. Brenda, I want to come to you, and then we'll go to Mark. Brenda, with the amount of data sets that you're dealing with, especially around housing and land, so on and so forth, and the kind of dashboards and metrics you can now get from a security perspective, would you say that security has now changed because now different folks, not necessarily folks with a technical posture to security, but folks who may come in from other sections within your sections within the organization, now have visibility into the security data? And when people look at things from different angles, they have different questions. Do you feel now that the visibility in data is now bringing us to realize new and different questions and realities that we wouldn't previously have thought of? Brenda.
I mean, for sure. I mean, when we are collectively logging, monitoring right across different devices, it's going to give you more analytics than before. And these dashboards, as long as the other groups are technically savvy, that can be able to analyze the data and give more of the perspective about how it impacts their business, especially because security is really a business problem. I think, to silo it within IT is really the wrong approach. I feel like it's intrinsically connected to business. And so the data about security can actually help a business sell and actually expand their growth and accelerate their growth. I actually find that security is a top of mind for so many of our clients. And we get so many inquiries about customers before the sale, during the sale, after the sale. Like, it doesn't matter when in the life cycle, we're constantly questioned. And we're just we very high profile. We constantly are looked at. So they're very interested in the data that we have and what kind of analytics that we have. And going back to analytics, it really is a proactive thing. Because if you can detect it early with analytics, then you're being proactive rather than reactive, as opposed to reacting to an incident.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Brenda. And that gives me a perfect platform to sort of weave in a question that's come in and come back to Mark before we go back to our friends at VMware back. And Mark, this is a question that relates to kind of what Brenda was talking about, is these dashboards give us insights. And if we share them and we provide visibility to more individuals in our organizations, we see different things. We all come at data from different perspectives. Data doesn't operate in a vacuum. The question here is, when a partner or a vendor, for that, brings you a particular analytics dashboard, gives you something that gives you an optic and an insight to what's happening within your organization and with your data, what are some KPIs and some metrics that for you define the quality of a dashboard? How do you know that the dashboard is doing for you what you want it to do? Mark?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we talk about often in our industry is the idea of making implicit things explicit. The idea of making work visible. When you walk up to a help desk and need something, you don't see, all of the work in front of them. So you have no context for what the current throughput workload is. So taking things like that is no different than security and making it visible. So you want to look at, for example, if you had a monitoring system, you want, number of systems, you want data that is historical, data that is real time. You want to be able to do configurable thresholds. You want to look for anomaly detection. Is it different than it was last week, and why? And it's the same with security. So when you get a dashboard, one of the most important things is that it's usable, it's simple, that it's understandable by, as Brendan said, this is not an IT thing. This is enterprise risk. And we can't go and say, well, we restored our backup, so we've got good business continuity. What I say to people is, then they say, what's your ransomware plan? And I say, well, it's the same as my server room fire plan. And if those were different, then something's wrong, because it's all about making sure that you know and have practiced that you can recover from a bad thing happening to you. So when we look at our dashboards, they have to be not disjointed, not, as I'll say, I don't want 20 systems. I don't want 20 panes of glass that all have different context switches. I want it to be usable and simple. I want it to highlight things at a 10-foot view that make me zoom down into, my 1 inch, and I want it to be accurate and consistent without data duplication. And I'm asking for a lot here, right? And I don't just want that for one thing. So I don't just want to know who's knocking at my door, at what port, and what they're trying to get to. I also want to know who's going out back to that same way. And I'm not saying this because we have this sponsor on, but one of the first times I ever saw this kind of sophisticated intelligence was actually Carbon Black. Many years ago, the first time I saw a demo, lots of people have it now, but the first time I saw the analysis of a process, in-RAM things happening, network traffic, where did it come from? Where is it going to? Did this happen last week? Is it happening somewhere else on another network, on the client's network? Those are the kinds of sort of gray distinctions we need to start to make. And that's what I want my dashboard is here's something you might be interested in. This is a known problem.
I really want to work with that and bring David into the conversation, because no solution is an island in and of itself. No solution is the island of protection for everything within our enterprise environment. Again, this ties into a question from the audience. That's talking about VMware Carbon Black, the aspect of integration. How do you step into integrating your solution, all of the different controls and all of the different processes, maybe even other products that currently sit within an enterprise environment? David, let's start off with you, and then Al, there's a question that's I think targeted to you as well. We'll weave it in from David. Let's start off with you.
I think number one, it's 2 words: open APIs. I mean, we've been open since day one, since we founded almost 17 years ago. So just the ability to connect to almost any other system, have that open data, have that open API, be able to give it and use it in any form, whether you're tying it into a SIM or you want to get other data fed into it. One of the things, like Brenda said, this analytics, right? I mean, we're doing that on the back end. We're doing behavior analytics, looking for those threats, because threats aren't just static anymore, right? It's like, oh, here's a piece of malware. It's an adversary doing something. And I always tell people, like I was talking with a customer early this morning and showing them a very advanced attack on their network. And I was like, and they asked me point blank, well, Dave, how do we find this on a 0 day? And I said, well, it's all about the analytics, because we can look at what's happening from a behavior side of it and says, you know what, we know this and this is not malware, but this should not be doing that. And just like Mark was saying, if I can't see that and make it eligible for everyone to be able to look at it and say, oh, this is bad stuff, you got to filter out all that noise, the stuff that, okay, we don't care. We already know that people are pinging this port or port scanning or whatever. We don't care. Are they able to execute PowerShell to do this and then do that? If I can see that and block it and get to it, then that's what I need. I need that visibility and that analytics to make that happen.
And I think you're pointing out to a second issue when we talk about security being broken, and that is the aspect of the visibility. How have we traditionally looked at situations, looked at challenges, looked at problems? And as I said in my introduction, right, problems, kind of like how Eric O'Neill mentioned yesterday morning in his keynote, are not supposed to be stop signs. They're kind of guidelines of telling us where we need to be next. That aspect really needs to feature into posture, which takes me to a very interesting note that's been me. And I'll frame this for you and see what kind of a picture you want to draw out of this. And this is this aspect of how do we establish trust as a vendor, but I like to sort of partner my security posture. How do you establish trust with your client in order to actually share more with you and give you more access to the solution? How do you navigate that piece of making sure that you have established the right trust factor with your clients to usher in a new version or a new vision? Al, let's go.
Yeah, first off, I think that's an excellent question, because there's a lot of people trying to solve these critical business issues in the industry. So I think, how do we differentiate ourselves, which ultimately through proof points can develop and establish trust over time, because you have to earn that right. I'll go back to what I said earlier with intrinsic security and our approach and what we're doing in the industry across these control points. And we talk about the 3 things that are so important that customers need to be aware of. And our approach focuses on that whole built-in approach. The exciting thing about VMware, and why, once again, I'm so excited about this, is they're such a significant player globally across any business vertical already, with their dominance with VM, 70 million plus worldwide, and also leveraging the cloud through AWS, through Azure, through Google, And the interesting thing is that becomes a foundation of one of the areas that customers are concerned about, the cloud. The other thing too is application development. Brenda, I think we're talking about, I wrote down the word, like how do you differentiate yourself? Well, in order to stay ahead of the curve and be relevant and drive impact for your customers or your to-be customers, this is what makes me unique. And leveraging data, first off, asking the right questions of it, because data is great, but it's how you use it and how you collaborate and leverage it really determines how you can move forward and take advantage of that. So the trust factor actually comes with a very articulate plan and go-to-market strategy, which selfishly we have. And it is about change, because to continue to do the same thing. And the first thing I would never do is say there's not great tools out there. There's great tools, but they're tools. It's not a platform. So you have to truly understand the control points, be it the network, be it the endpoint, be it the workload, and be it the clouds, once again, on any device, anytime, anywhere. And how are you going to secure that? And by the way, this is an evolution. It's called, how do we increase a posture, security posture? And that's a roadmap. And that's a partnership that we develop. And we've been very successful. And just to give you an example, in the banking industry alone, this new word, not that it's not new, but zero trust. Like, how do you actually invoke and instrument zero trust into an environment? Well, it is about, number one, sitting down and truly understanding the persona of good, and then everything else is bad. And there's tools and there's approaches and there's applications that we use, like App Control, to help with that. And that's it's truly differentiated in the market because of its unique capabilities. Why I bring that up is that's helps as one of the pillars for trust. It's about what does good and great look like, and everything else we're going to question, we're going to audit, we're going to remediate, we're going to learn from, we're going to proactively shut down other areas to control and manage our system environments better so we're not exposed. We do the same with large government. Something that came across my table just the other day, I'm working on a very interesting opportunity, obviously with all these cyber threats and so on going on. Data visibility is absolutely critical. Now, the question is, where is that coming from? Where are those vulnerabilities being presented and why? And then how can I actually mediate and address that before an incident actually happens? So they've turned to us to say, listen, we need your help because we need your expertise. And then we have to layer in what we already know. And that's collaboration, which ultimately drives and builds towards trust. So there's just a couple of examples that I can reference quickly.
Thank you for that, because I think you've brought us to the third point of when we talk about security is broken, really talking about the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, this aspect of we've been very tool-centric when we ought to be people and process-centric, which goes back to something that Mark has ingrained very strongly in my brain, which is people, process, technology, and in that order. The sentence continues from there and doesn't even stop there. So Mark, I really am happy of how the conversations that we've had are coming out through the discussions with our friends here at VMWare back. We've got another 20 odd minutes. And Brenda, I want to come back to you. One of the discussions we had in the pre-panel talk was about this aspect of security now within our organizations, transforming less from forming into a revenue center rather than cost center. Through your engagements with firms like VMware Carbon Black, other firms as well, are you seeing now that you're able to position security as a way in which we can have ROI, not just a return on investment, return on innovation, on imagination? Where are you seeing security now being seen from a revenue perspective within your organization?
Well, currently our clients are expecting it. So it is an expectation. So it hasn't turned into the revenue stream yet, but every day I wish I could because it's just our aspect of security. I feel like the scope is so pervasive, and it just touches so many areas, especially if in the movement of the digital transformation with the cloud usage, with just so many aspects of security evolving. Certainly the cost has increased. And so it would be nice to actually realize that in the revenue stream. At the moment, we haven't, but I wouldn't be surprised if other CISOs are coming up to say that it is becoming. You can even sell it into different layers, right? It goes back to tolerance level. There are some clients that are extremely low risk tolerance, just about everything. And then there's some clients that are more pragmatic and say, okay, well, you know what, I'm okay with that type of scenario. Our data is encrypted in the backup. And so from our standpoint, it's we don't have that low risk tolerance, we have a medium risk tolerance. So it would be nice to be able to transform to the client to be able to say, yep, you have this risk tolerance, and therefore these risk-based controls apply. So I would like to at some point see the industry go into that direction, because I think it's the right direction, because it's not one size fit all. But I feel we're still ways to go from there.
I think, Brenda, your philosophy needs to sort of be promoted even more, because you use the word. I kept talking about your organization, and you kept talking about industry, which again takes us to a fourth point about what's broken about security, because I think often we've been thinking about cybersecurity is about protecting our enterprise. You're parlaying this perspective that no, it's not about just protecting cybersecurity now. It's protecting the community that we're in. It's about understanding what's going on around us and to those. So thank you for being a champion of that approach. We've got 15 or more minutes, and I've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to do my best to stitch it in there. To my panelists, I do apologize if we may not be going to the last two questions that we had in our pre-panel meet, but I'm sure it'll all factor into the slide. Mark, let's come to you, and this is this aspect of sharing. And we spoke about this earlier on, that VMware Carbon Black a lot of work, especially Al mentioned, about nation states and the aspects of cyber warfare and spyware, so on and so forth. Are you also seeing now that in your position as a core service provider within a pretty significant municipality, that now you're also finding that you are now a source of intelligence, you're now a source of information for the community around what's happening in cybersecurity, and sort of be that engine of proactive thinking? What's your intelligence sharing practices? How has that changed over the last few years? Mark?
So there's always kind of been the informal network of people who know each other, and that hasn't gone away. There's the, hey, this just happened, what are you doing about this? Those kinds of things. And that could be through chat, that could be through phone calls, that could be through user groups. And in my industry, we are not competitive, right? We have defined territories, so we can share all our trade secrets pretty much, other than confidential information, without any fear of real consequences. But things have been evolving more, that there have been official groups. So you have things like CCTX, which both utilities and large companies use. You have Municipal Information Systems Association, which is a citywide one, where they have a formal cybersecurity program where they designed to share information. You have institutions like this creating get-togethers about specific topics, about how would you handle X, or walkthroughs. I remember one time I was at a municipal conference, and Wasaga Beach was one of the first ones that was really hit with ransomware in a public way. Their CISO came and literally walked us through day by day. Here's what happened to us. Here's how we did it. Here's a picture of me going to a Bitcoin machine and buying something, like things that you may not have experienced yet. And the other thing that we all share in common is that we have these emerging frameworks that we're being told we have to comply with. And while they're not all the same, they're all kind of based on NIST or NERC CIP or PIPEDA or something lifted from all those things. So, everyone needs to count your assets, make them safe, watch your assets. Did you inspect them? Everyone's got that whole thing, right? And the thing that doesn't come with most of those things is additional funding. So just like Brenda said, it's expected of us. It's not a new source of revenue. There might be some cost avoidance stuff we can do in there, but there's a whole bunch of extra work. So the next thing we're starting to talk about is, can we share the tactical work? Is there a way to scale the duplication of cost and not just knowledge? And that's where I think sometimes having a good partner or having good friend organizations that do the same work as you to share the burden and the load, because the attacks are increasing exponentially. The value of our data is also, like I said earlier, getting higher and higher, so becoming more attractive. And we're implementing systems so quickly, we can't even train our workforce to keep up with them. And one of the things I often say is that we're moving too slow for our customers and too fast for our workforces. Somewhere that we create this knowledge gap, and maybe technology can fill that, but so far it is a little bit anxiety inducing.
Yep. I think CISO Forum Canada has been a great place to gather quotes, and I know there's a running joke in the live chat about all of the quotes that we can put on t-shirts. I've found at least 5 of them, so to the audience, if you're making t-shirts of these quotes, Mark Dillon is a well for those quotes with the CISO Forum Canada branding just behind it. Got another 7 to 8 more minutes, and I've got 2 questions that I really want to get to. But Mark, I really appreciate the fact that you've not only mentioned about how we share information, but you've really pressed home this point that, listen, the secret to success is that there are no secrets. And I really like that information gathering and sharing process that you've championed through the community. So thank you for your efforts. David and then Al, and then we'll do a quick closing from there. David, this question is more around, and I can tell that our audience is very familiar with not just VMware, but understands exactly why you've kept the carbon black branding there, because the carbon black brand is very, very well known. And a shout out to your team again, for Shannon, Dana, and Kristen for all of the work that they've been doing to push out some really good, as we say in here in Canada, some really good Timbit pieces of information that you can use and digest. David, can you talk to us a little bit about the research and development practices that you do? How do you continue to enhance the carbon black stack? What do you do? What are you doing? And how can our community members get involved in that in any way? David?
Well, we do a couple things, right? So not only do we have community at Carbon Black or community.carbonblack.com,
Yep.
which all our customers have access to. So we have a huge community, 30, 40,000 people in there that, just like Mark said, you got to share that information. If I have an issue over here, I can help someone, 10 time zones away around the world. That's one big thing. The other thing is that our great TAL team, which is our research team, that's all they do. They're researching these threats, just like myself. We're looking at those threats. How can we make our products better? How do we find that stuff before anybody else? And so we can get that to our customers and do something with it and protect their environment. And it's, again, I can't stress visibility enough, but it's the ability to see what you can't see yet. If we know the behaviors of an attacker, it doesn't matter if they've come up with a new tool. If they've got these similar behaviors, we can still see them and still block them and provide that context around that,
Yep.
those threats anywhere.
And I think I would agree that there's, the community and the collaboration piece is central. C for carbon black, but C also for community and collaboration. Folks are doing a very good job in building that. So I thank you for having that level of openness. Al,
Well, I think, just one quick thing. I noticed, that's a big thing though, is in Mark's situation, it's great. They're all sharing information. But as you've seen over the years, as breaches happen, there's a lot of breaches that never go public. They never talk about it. People don't, I don't want to tell you what I'm doing. I don't want to tell you what I'm doing either. And that makes it 10 times worse, because as we saw from like WannaCry or something like that, if we would have known, it just followed the sun. It just went around the world. We've got to do a much better job as a community in every single industry sharing information. I don't care what firewall you use or what you do, but share that information. And I think that's one good thing that Carbon Black has done for the community. I know I give a lot of talks at community events to give back to make that happen.
And I hate to jump in here, Ali, but I just want to make a comment. The one thing, David, because I think this is really important, we run a very specific behavioral analytics team that has access to 1 trillion events a day, 1 trillion. So we use that to capture and obviously enhance, build, share how we engage and how we evolve our products. And I just think that's important to note.
Absolutely.
And that just, is a big vote of confidence back to trust with when we say something or what we're exposed to, how we share that in partnership with our customers. So that's not insignificant. That's where AI and data is so important. We use it it's similar to medical research when you try and find the next cure for cancer or so on and so forth. I just think that's an important note that there's a powerful team in the background that's gathering, collecting, sharing, and actually, reacting to product development as a result of that.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I do work in the AI space as well. When you got access to whatever it is, 1 billion, 1 trillion events, knowing how to do some crowd control in that and knowing how to filter within that is an art and a science in and of itself. And that's not an easy equilibrium to find. And I think to our audience, I highly recommend that, again, go to the the VMware Carbon Black group and pick up some of those assets. There's some really good pieces of information there that you can draw from. We have a few more minutes, and Al, there's a question for you that I hope we can get to real quick, and I'll read it verbatim. And that is, are you seeing a difference when you engage with public sector versus private sector? Anything at all, or do you see it almost as the same? Al?
Well, first off, the problems are the same. So everyone has similar challenges. How they can actually, I would say, invoke a solution and transform the organization, there is a difference.
Yeah.
So, and what I would say is it comes back to, hate to use the word, but bureaucracy, complications, political will, contracting. There's a lot of situations and circumstances that we find we have to navigate differently that can be a little more time consuming with the with the public sector, governments in particular. And the willingness is the same, the problems are the same. So what we do, because we have experience in both, back to upfront, part of that qualification in partnership, it's also, we can paint a wonderful picture, but then how do we get to the end game and end state? So part of that process for us is an end-to-end discussion in how do we actually demonstrate and put in place a solution to value that aligns with what the customer is capable and willing to do. There was actually an excellent report from McKinsey I read when I was back at Dell Technologies that talked about why transformation is or actually fails. And a lot of it had to do with people, process, timing, and believe it or not, process has a lot to do with procurement and legislative hurdles and so on. So I just bring that up because I'm very conscious of all those elements, because it's nice to come in and talk about, here's all the wonderful things we can do. Now, let's truly sit down and say, how much of a reality is this within your particular environment or business vertical? That's probably what I'd say.
Fantastic. And the final question that we have will go to both Brenda and Mark, and then we'll come to a soft landing from there. Brenda, this is more to do with when we talk about security and it's broken, this has a lot to do with how we structure our teams in security. Over the last few years, what kind of the different kind of roles that you're now seeing, and perhaps even roles that you previously wouldn't have associated with a office of the CISO, so to speak? Brenda?
So my team is actually structured in 4 areas. One is governance, one is initiative, one is incident response, and then the last one is operation. So it covers all the stack within security. Now, what I haven't explained is there are also security skills within the business units, because we can't alone be in our group and not have enough skill set elsewhere. So we do train in other areas like the developers. So from that standpoint, we try to build security knowledge in other roles and not just specialize in security.
So it may just be me, but we may have lost Brenda for a little while. Oh,
Nope.
Brenda,
Can you
you're
hear
back
me?
on now. We lost you at just maybe about 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, I was just saying that we build also security skill set elsewhere in the business units and with the developers and the IT. So I feel like the strength of the architecture, the developers, the skill set there is very important. And what you want to do is have security built in proactively from the inception of a project, inception of a new architecture build. So from our standpoint, we're seeing skills needed right across different roles, as well as centralized within security.
Brenda, thank you for that. And we'll have the closing line with Mark. And this aspect of awareness programming. Mark, if you can take the next few seconds to talk a little bit about some of the creative things that you've been doing in awareness programming, including some tabletop exercises, so on and so forth. Mark, if you can just summarize some of the awareness programs you're running, and then we'll come to our conclusion. Mark?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say about our earlier conversation about sharing information is bad guys don't have any trouble sharing what they know. They're very good at sharing. So the last thing we should do is say, it's going to give me an advantage if I hide something, because it's not. You don't see them coming, and
Absolutely.
they already hit somebody else, and the fact that you don't know it doesn't make anyone safer. When it comes to awareness, the first thing is understanding. So one of the things that Brenda talked about was this is not an IT problem, and it's not an IT problem.
Yeah.
So you want to start at the actual person who's closest to the tool that is at risk. And the other thing that we heard her talk about is the idea that there are different roles than you might think, right? So traditionally you would have a finance person maybe going through and filling out something like a risk profile. And that means now they get the cyber insurance survey, and can they really fill that out?
Yeah.
Is there some side reporting? Is there education? Do you need regulatory people to actually join your tech team? And I think what we'll see eventually is we'll see technical skills in all people and a reduction in the size of the technical team itself. Because at one point, it might be we're the only ones who can, install an application. If you work at a place that doesn't let you install applications, which isn't a bad idea, it's frustrating because you know how to do it. You have a computer at home, you've done it before. So you want to design the process from your top down. So the asset owner, the department owner says, I have these 13 things and I want to protect them. Okay, how do you want to protect them? It's no different than when you have a business agreement with another company, write it out in plain language, exactly how you want it written, and then you send it to the lawyers, and the lawyers turn it into legal speak, but they don't modify the content of what you said. It's no different with security profile. Your CEO should understand how you're protecting yourself. The details of the technical parts of it, that's up to IT to do, but not to decide. Because otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where you get hacked and your executive team says, I thought you said we were safe. You'd rather have them say, I remember when we made that concession. I remember when we accepted that risk. What should we do now instead? So that's the kind of conversations you want to start to have. And when you mentioned the tabletops, I was first introduced to that when I was at the municipalities. One of the things that they have to do each year is run an enterprise risk assessment where they go through designed disaster. Let's play through the day. Let's get all of our people for real, and we're going to walk through what we would really do and learn where our gaps are. These exercises are very good to do for cybersecurity. A good place to do it is to start with incident response. Would that simply be our backups don't work, or that be there was a data breach? Now we're pretending to write out the statement that's going to go to the press, and let's write it out and see how we'd write it, and then see how that feels. And you get a lot of buy-in to, oh, that could really happen. That moment when your executive turns to you and says, could that happen? That's the moment you want.
Absolutely. And on that moment, we've come to the conclusion of our hour together. Mark, Brenda, David, Al, thank you so much for your time. And to our audience that's listening, and if you go back to how we began our session, I mentioned that these are all individuals who take responsibility, who take ownership of what they do and give to our community. And I've always said this, when in a cybersecurity perspective, when you find something's broken, something's not working, it's not about the CISO or the lead on IT coming forward and saying, well, who broke it? It's about asking, how can we fix it? And as Mark so eloquently put, the we is not just IT. It's about the entire institution, the entire team that you have. And VMware Carbon Black has explained exactly how they work well with your team. Wish we could have time for more questions. I don't want to come in between the next session, which is going to be on an interesting topic around telemedicine. Before I do that, I want to thank our audience, and thank the team at CyberX for putting together another fascinating panel and fascinating discussion here at CISO Forum Canada. I'm going to ask our panelists to just stay on so that we can have a quick 30-second debrief in the green room. But to our audience, I hope you enjoyed the next 30-minute break, and we'll see you at 2:30 p.m. with Mayor Sean Collier kicking it off on a discussion around telemedicine. Thank you all, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.